In today's broadcast, I'd like to talk about the subject of emotions. Emotions. Can you trust them? I'm often asked about emotions in people's lives and the struggles that they have with them. So, do you struggle with your emotions at times? Maybe feeling like kind of the tail is wagging the dog? I think probably we can all relate to that. In fact, too often, I believe we credit our emotions for the reason that we feel all stirred up inside and disturbed about whatever's going on in our lives. We give our emotions credit for that. However, when you really evaluate emotions as God has designed them, they should not be considered as kind of agitating enemies of our soul. No, emotions and feelings are, not some separate entities that should be seen as essentially good or evil for that matter. Now, of course, when we acknowledge that our emotions are stirred up and they're being stimulated, they can be stimulated from an either or perspective, can't they? Our emotions could be stimulated by some kind of sinful thoughts and suggestions, or they could be stimulated by some godly initiative. So it would be proper for us to ask at this point, are emotions good or are they bad? Well, to properly answer that question, we would have to understand what in fact contributes to our emotions and why we feel the way we do. Because our emotions and the responses that we have to them obviously vary at times. And in order to be able to understand, we would need to make an important differentiation. We would need to differentiate between the facts, the situation as it is that we're confronted with, and then our response, which if we're Christians should be a faith response. Are we responding receptive to God in the particular situation that we find ourselves? And then thirdly, our feelings, which are an expression of our emotional response to the situation. So again, we need to differentiate between facts, faith, and feeling. Now it's clear that God created us with emotions. And so there's really nothing right or wrong with emotions. They just are. They're part of our God-created humanity. In fact, feelings are the expression of our emotions. We might even call them the colors of the soul. We got the colors of the rainbow. Well, the feelings are the emotions are the colors of the soul. They are spectacular and incredible. And frankly, without our feelings, the world that we live in would be a pretty dull place, wouldn't it? It would be a very colorless place to live. And, we've all had people enter into an event or a party and, their emotional presence, kind of livens the place, the color of the moment. So we can feel and experience a great range of emotions in any given day. We can be up and then we can be down. And so they vary significantly. Now, all of us have had varying experiences when our emotions have attempted to influence us in one way or another. And it's important that we kind of understand, what are we talking about when we're talking about emotions? We know what we're feeling, but how is the word defined? Well, it comes from an old English, or I should say an old Latin word. It's derived from a Latin word, which literally means to move out, to move out. And so emotions allow us to be moved, aroused, invigorated, enlivened. You can see that God created us with emotions that we might be able to experience life as God intended. Part of our emotional expression is being able to experience God's life in us and through us. So we need to experience emotion, affection, fervor, enthusiasm, and passion. Without emotions, life would lose its luster. There'd be no thrill of excitement, no flush of embarrassment, no frustration of failure. Without emotions, we'd lose the wonder of amazement at the things around us and beyond us. And so we should embrace our emotions and allow them to provide passion in our lives. Nothing wrong with emotions. However, it's sometimes difficult to distinguish between our emotions because we have what we might call positive and then we have negative emotions. So how should we process our emotions when we're, for example, experiencing discouragement or disappointment or sadness, which can sometimes lead to depression? These are obviously valid questions that we should be allowed to process because they happen in our real lives experiences. Now, these types of negative emotions often come as a result of some kind of loss. And there can be a variety of losses in our life, can't there? The loss of a job, the loss of a physical ability, the loss of a relationship, the loss of an opportunity, or the loss of a loved one who has passed on. Now, as we experience loss, it's important to acknowledge that it's okay to be down. Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians chapter 4 that we are afflicted in every way, in a multitude of ways. But he said we're not crushed when we are afflicted. We might find ourselves perplexed, for sure. We might experience a perplexity, but we don't find ourselves despairing, even though we might have been persecuted. We recognize that in the midst of whatever we're experiencing, Paul says, that we're not forsaken. We might have been struck down, but we're not destroyed. Because we know in whom we have believed and we know who our life is. And so it's important that we don't lose sight of our identity during these times of loss. In fact, it's also important, I think, to acknowledge at this point that the Christian will have what we might refer to as dry spells, where, we don't feel the same sense of God's presence. We don't have the same kind of excitement about things that we might have had, those mountaintop experiences. But what I would like to remind us at those times is, don't let, so-called friends, don't let Job's comforters send you into a guilt trip by statements like, if you feel distant from God, then there's something wrong with you. No, usually that distance that we feel is within the soul. And the reality is, who's moved? Certainly God hasn't gone anywhere, so we've probably been distracted. And in fact, during those times of feeling a distance from the Lord, or we're not emotionally where we've been, it may be that God intends for us to experience what some Christian authors have referred to as the dark night of the soul, which is simply God's opportunity for us to appreciate His light and life, even when we're not feeling it. Now, sometimes when we experience loss, we have the emotions of sorrow and grief. And once again, these are legitimate human emotions. Don't try to live in denial. It was at the news of the death of his close friend, Lazarus, that Scripture records that Jesus wept. So yes, even Jesus experienced sorrow and grief. You see, God's intent for us is that we might experience a soul rest, not a kind of a giddy happiness because everything is going our way. No, things don't always go our way, and frankly, we're not always happy because our circumstances are anything but happy. You see, the object is not to get high on Jesus, as some would suggest. But neither do we want to be sourpuss Christians who look like they've been sucking on a dill pickle. No wonder others aren't interested in our Christian experience and our Christianity. No, our countenance should reveal that we have the joy of the Lord. So, we've come full circle here. How then shall we deal with these fluctuating and varying emotions of positive and negative in our lives? Well, I would suggest that our human emotions must always follow. They must always follow where our reasoned thoughts and our carefully determined choices lead us. With this important clarification, our reasoned thoughts and carefully determined choices should lead us as God is leading us by His Spirit. And so, the objective of the Christian life is not that you and I become some kind of superhuman individuals. We're not superhuman, nor are we super Christian. But we have the supernatural life of Christ abiding and dwelling within us. And He wants to be our life and to live through us as our life. And so we should allow for that Christ life to be lived out in our humanity. And that includes the times when we're dealing with all of these emotions. Remember, the facts first. What is the situation? What is the truth of the situation? Second, a faith response to what God is initiating in the midst of the situation. Allowing then our emotions to follow and not take the lead. God's peace can be a settled tranquility that is beyond our human comprehension, that allows us to experience soul rest in the sufficiency of Christ during the emotional uncertainties that we are certain to face. Until next time, trust in Him. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thank you.